welcome to my channel. So today I have my favorite books of 2020. I will be listing them in order from number 5 to number 1. So stick around and see which book made my number 1 spot for my best read of the year. Coming in at number 5, we have Intimations by Zadie Smith. And Intimations is a collection of essays that was written at the start to the peak of the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and most of it is set in New York City. And as you know, New York City and New Jersey was hit very hard for the first wave of the COVID-19. We were the epicenter of America, so she really goes into those surreal moments that we faced as New York and New Jersey residents, just like what it meant to have everything literally stop before our eyes. She then goes into more so like philosophical pondering of why we feel the need to work as humans. And I really like the essays where she talks about time stopping and what that means for us as humans and what we do for that time and how we view time. Do we view it as a way to fill, do we fill time with work, with being busy, or do we allow time to pass? And I don't know, it was just really good at just honing in on those feelings initially from the COVID-19 pandemic. But I really enjoyed the final essay at the end of the book entitled Postscript, Contempt as a Virus. And she speaks about, so she's talking this whole time about COVID-19, and then she completely takes a 180 and talks about contempt as a virus specifically in America. And she gets very political, not in an obnoxious way, but it just really goes to show how, yes, COVID-19 is a real manifestation of a virus that infects and travels, and it's unknown, but there are also underlying issues within our country when it comes to being content. She talks a lot about just becoming a statistic and how herd immunity somehow is okay to people because we separate ourselves from the empathy of connecting with other people when we start viewing people as statistics. So I just found that essay to be kind of my favorite and the most strong in terms of just connecting everything. I really enjoyed this collection of essays by Zadie Smith. You should definitely check it out. She puts into words, I think, a lot of what most of us felt during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and even now. Coming in at number 4, I have When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi. When Breath Becomes Air is an autobiography written by Kalanithi detailing his experiences growing up and how he came to decide to become a neurosurgeon, and then following his life when he receives a diagnosis and a prognosis that does not look too good for him. And what I really found interesting about this book, this autobiography, was that it was captivating in the way that he talks about mortality, not morality, in the way that he talks about mortality. And it's kind of crazy that I read all of these books. I read this book in the beginning in January of this year, and it actually really relates to a lot of what Zadie Smith talks about, and it just seems to be like an underlying theme of 2020, at least in my first 2 favorites. But Paul talks a lot about wanting to understand the cerebral workings of being human, and he talks a lot about the anatomy, but then also what's underneath that, like the societal pressures that we face as humans and just what cultivates a person to become who they actually are, both physically and metaphysically. And he was just extremely brilliant. And he first got his master's in English, he had a master's in philosophy, and then he went on to get his medical degree, and he made it into, I believe it was Stanford's neurosurgery for residency, which is insane. So he was an extremely brilliant doctor who really asked the philosophical questions as well. He was always wanting to understand and know what truly makes a human being a human being. And in a way, his life becomes a lens through which he views that, because he gets hit, like I was saying before, with a diagnosis that alters and kind of puts into perspective what he was seeing as a doctor and then becoming a patient. So I highly recommend this book. It literally had me bawling my eyes out when I finished it, and I sat on my bed and I was just thinking about my own life and the things that I want to achieve, and it was just a sad and beautiful story all at once. I recommended this book to so many people, and I really think if you're in for a new read, this is a great collection to check out. And number 3, I have Postcolonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. And Postcolonial Love Poems is a collection of poems that centers on Natalie Diaz's Indigenous and Latinx heritage by using motifs such as the land, the river, growing up in a reservation, and things of that sort to center the narrative of her poetry on. And what I really enjoyed about this collection of poems was not only the language, but just the way that Native Americans view the land. It's literally holy land and it's sacred, and it kind of makes me sad how we view the land now, and it was just refreshing to read that in a collection of poetry. And I really loved the poem called American Arithmetic, where it details the injustices that Indigenous folks face on the reservations and how they basically still don't have rights. They don't have access to clean water, and it was just extremely eye-opening to me, just to see what another community of people go through. You can definitely check out, I found Button Poetry. Natalie Diaz herself is reciting the poem, and it has a really beautiful video that goes along with it. So I will link that in the description box down below. Definitely check it out. But this just made it into my top poetry collections of 2020 because I've always admired Natalie Diaz. I learned about her when I was in undergrad, and she just has a really almost instinctive way of connecting the land to human nature and seeing yourself in the land and seeing your spirituality in the land, which I'm really into. Coming in at number 2, coming in hot, we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And this book was so good. It's a break from my very deep thinking philosophical reads. And it's about a girl named Kaya Clark who grows up in the marshlands of North Carolina, and she has an abusive father who was never around, and she has a mother who abandoned her and her family when she was very young. And she details growing up, being uneducated, living off this beautiful land that the townspeople view as just dirty, and they say the marsh people are uncivilized, and it was just an extremely gorgeous narrative. The author, Delia Owens, is a scientist and a researcher. She details environmentalism, I believe. So she just had a really unique perspective, and she wrote the creatures and the animals and the insects that live in the swamp, and even the way the water moves in the swamp in such a beautiful, insightful way that seemed very knowledgeable but wasn't too gritty in the science. And that wasn't even just the focus of the story within growing up with Kaya Clark, who is uneducated, but she's the smartest person because she knows the swamp like the back of her hand. We are also thrown into a murder mystery of a very popular townsman as Kaya's narrative is being told. And at the end of it, I was just completely shocked, and I couldn't believe it. And the story was just so engrossing. And it was a different read. It was outside of my comfort zone, and I really enjoyed that about this book. It's phenomenal. I'm sure if you're into BookTube deep, you've probably heard so many people talk about this novel. I was late to the bandwagon, but I 100% understand why it's so critically acclaimed, and I hear they might be making a movie out of it, which I am 100% here for, and I will go see the movie because I love a good murder mystery with interweaving themes. Interweaving themes. Yeah, so that was at my number 2 spot for top books that I read this year. Coming in at number 1, you probably guessed it. If you are a follower of mine on Instagram, you know I love poetry, so my number 1 book has to be a poetry collection, and I'm going with Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Vuong. And Vuong is probably one of my favorite poets at the time. He's really interesting and a really great writer. And the reason why I was just so obsessed with this collection of poetry is Ocean's very great at bringing in his own personal experiences and making them universal by tapping in to common themes or common things that everyone and anyone can relate to, which I think is a quality that makes a great poet, especially when it comes to poetry, because people don't typically get into poetry or it can become very subjective. So I really enjoyed that about his collection. And in specific, he just, once again, talks a lot about his upbringing as a Vietnamese American and what it meant to be an immigrant, and how in some of the poems he speaks about how his mother couldn't read or write, and just how he felt that his mother was a symbol of his heritage. And then he's also in a foreign land where he's trying to cultivate his own sense of identity. And within there's just so many great things. There's love poems. There are poems that contemplate like the origin of time. And then there's also poems that focus and center a lot on his Vietnamese upbringing. And I just really truly enjoyed this poetry collection. It's my number 1 favorite thing that I read so far this year. I'm obsessed. Like, I think I want to reread it and like have parts of it memorized because I just loved it so much. It's right up there. If you have watched my earlier videos with Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith, like I have Life on Mars and Night Sky with Exit Wounds. They're both extremely good. And I believe this poetry collection won the T.S. Eliot Prize in 2017. And we know T.S. Eliot is like a legend in poetry and just groundbreaking in the use of language. So definitely check that out if you're a poetry reader. That's all for my top 5 books that I read in 2020 so far. I will be doing a video about my Goodreads challenge for this year, and I'm trying to get that done. So maybe I'll add in a couple more favorite books that I read so far this year. I did read a couple poetry collections, and I'm currently reading Luster, which is highly critically acclaimed, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So if you would like an update, possible update on my favorites list, just check out that video. I'll link it to this one when the video is live, but that should be coming after this one. I'll probably do that more so in like January. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know your favorite reads of the year. I would love to be put on to new books. I'm trying to cultivate my early reading to be read list for 2021. And I just feel like that helps me stay on track when I'm excited about things that I want to read. So thank you very much for watching, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
And I was like, yo.